Welcome to Insights from Getting Undressed with speaker, author, and coach, David Cooks.
I'm David Cooks, and welcome to Insights from Getting Undressed, where we speak to readers from across the country and get their insights from reading my book, Getting Undressed from Paralysis to Purpose. Our guest today is Scott Paton. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Now, Scott, before we begin getting into your insights about the book, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and give our audience some background about who Scott Paton is.
Sure, happy to, David. So I grew up on the East Coast, went to school here for undergraduate, and then spent a bunch of my time in Europe, spent about 15 years living in Europe, doing various things, everything from running a restaurant to investment banking, which became my long-term profession. Moved back to the States about 15 years ago. Still live on the East Coast, up in the Boston area. And like yourself, have been a great follower of college basketball. Unlike yourself, didn't have the skill set, but have been a big fan of basketball. I've been a big fan of Duke, and in particular, a big fan of your book.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're happy you're here with us today. Let's get started. We ask all of our guests the same three questions. All right. The first question is, what story in the book did you relate to the most and why?
Well, there's a lot of stories I relate to on a different level. I think the one that has probably hit most directly and was most directly relatable to me was actually later in the book when you effectively were let go from your alma mater in high school, and you were doing a great job. You were clearly connecting with people, not just your students, but with faculty and administrators. You were having success. Success always doesn't come in a straight line, as we know. Sometimes it comes in a sawtooth. And you were having success in class. You were having success outside of class. You're having success on the basketball court, and you got hit in the side of the head. And that happens. And that happens in life. It happens to everybody in life. It's one of the lessons I teach my kids. It doesn't matter how successful you are, you'll have failures, and how you deal with the failures. And so, having gone through something similar like that myself recently, that was particularly acute.
What are some of your key takeaways from reading the book?
Well, I think there's a lot of key takeaways. Probably, and I've read the book 3 or 4 times now, and every time I take something different away. I think in my most recent reading of the book, the takeaway for me was that we are all at points in time paralyzed. You have a physical paralysis, but I think in our lives we all face some forms of paralysis, usually out of fear. Fear of doing something, fear of not doing something, fear of being inadequate, fear of what the results might be, and what your chapter on perspective, which is really every chapter, but specifically perspective, really defines what you do with that paralysis, how you work your way through, how you look to the next play, how you look to the next thing, how you speak to yourself about that paralysis. Because we always, and a lot of times in your book, it's not the physical paralysis that's central to what you're grappling with. It's whatever that next obstacle is. And actually, your physical capabilities aren't really the impediment to getting through that obstacle. It's the mental and the spiritual and the faithful, and the will. What will you say to yourself to get through that moment of paralysis? And while many people can have empathy to somebody who is physically paralyzed, I think from experientially really identifying, I think we all feel paralyzed at time. And the real sort of lessons is how you get through that paralysis on your own.
Okay. I want to go back to the first question and see if we can dig a little deeper.
Sure.
And you talked about how me getting fired when I was coaching relates to a situation similar to what you've gone through recently. Is there anything in particular that struck you about that story that helps you in your situation or was similar to your situation that you could share?
Sure. I mean, I think, I've been very fortunate in that I've had a lot of successes in my life, and ultimately more successes than what I'll call failures, but failures is actually a misnomer.
Mhm.
Setbacks is a better word. So I've been very blessed from that perspective. So I've had many perspectives in those situations. I've had perspectives where my takeaway was not as positive as it could be. It didn't lead me to that next play. It got me
Mhm.
effectively paralyzed.
Mhm.
And I've had other situations, having learned from that, where I understood you have to move to the next play and move on. And it's really all about what you say to yourself when these setbacks occur. There's a I'm not a devout follower of Tony Robbins, but there's a excerpt from Tony Robbins where he talks about interviewing Carly Simon, who singer songwriter, but well known for her stage fright, and she doesn't perform live very often. And he asked her, "Well, what's that feeling like before you go on stage?" And she says, "Well, my hands get sweaty. I get this ache in my stomach, and my spine starts tingling, and I know I can't go on." And he asked the same question of Bruce Springsteen, who's arguably one of the best on stage performers, and he says, "What do you feel like before you go on stage?" And he says, "Well, my hands get sweaty, and I get an ache in my stomach and a tingle up my spine, and I'm ready to go." And so the same circumstances, but it's all about the perspective, what you say to yourself when those things occur. And I think in that time when you got fired from the court, it was what were you saying to yourself? Were you talking about the things that, back to when you first had your aneurysm, and the doctor said what you can't do, or are you talking about what you can do? Are you talking about, what door does this open or what door does this close? Are
Mhm.
you wallowing in why it happened, or are you figuring out where the next play comes from? And I think that perspective, that goes back to what I was saying earlier,
Mhm.
that we all have moments of paralysis, and what we say to ourselves and how we react to that is really what will either lead us to, the next step in a richer life, or staying in that mire of paralysis.
Okay, fantastic. Um, what is your favorite quote from the book?
My favorite quote is, "Your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure,"
Mhm.
which I personally fight with all the time whenever I'm doing something which I know I could be pushing harder, and keeping that self discipline to push harder. So I think that's a truism. No matter what obstacle you're facing, no matter what your capabilities are.
Okay. Before we close, we always give a reader an opportunity to freestyle. Take a moment or so and share anything on your mind or heart about the book that you would want people who are listening to us to know.
Well, I think one of the things that I took away from the book, and I realized it only in the end, was the cover has a wheelchair on the front, and the beginning of the book is this your story about how your life got turned around in a snap of a finger, and it ended up being in a wheelchair. But as you read the book and you think about the book and you get perspective on the book, as I exit the book, I almost forget that you're in a wheelchair.
Hmm.
I almost forget that the form of paralysis that you've battled through is a physical paralysis, in part because every time there's other opportunities for paralysis, i.e., obstacles in your life, things that would keep you down, things
Mhm.
that would, it has nothing to do with what physical limitations or requirements are. It's just life. And so by the end of the book, I don't see you in a wheelchair. I just see you as somebody that has, continued when things hit them to believe in your faith, believe in your perspective, and to go to the next play and move on. And so, to me, the lessons become that much more. While you certainly get my attention in the beginning, the lessons become that much more identifiable for me and my experience
Mhm.
as we get to the end of the book.
Wow. Well, it's interesting. There's a story that I tell of a friend of mine in high school. We were going to visit someone, and this was like our third stop to get some people. And he said to me, "Aren't you going to get out and ring the doorbell?" And I'm like, well, man, I'm in a wheelchair. And he had forgotten in such a short period of time that I was in a wheelchair. And one of the things that you said that really touched me was, as you read the book, you forgot my physical circumstances and you got a glimpse of me as a person and my life. And I think for everyone, if we can get people to see past our limitations to who we really are, it does have an impact. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about
100%.
before.
100%.
Okay. Well, let me just say thank you, Scott, for sharing with us today. We're excited that you came and were a part of our program. We'll have more insights from Getting Undressed next time. Remember, whatever life throws your way, your ability to endure it is always greater than your willingness to endure it.
You can order your copy of Getting Undressed from Paralysis to Purpose at davidcookspeaks.com or on amazon.com. Special thanks to Scott Paton for sharing his insights from Getting Undressed.